Tom Schoaf.
Semi-legal document.
Andrea, we're good? We're good? Okay. Folks, give us a couple minutes, please. Couple minutes. There's still food left in there. Like there's cookies. Everyone, it's Ed's birthday today. Can we say happy birthday to Ed? Isn't it your birthday today?
Happy birthday.
Sorry, Ed. It's Jen Daniels' birthday. We're gonna sing happy birthday to Jen through Ed.
Chair Weiss, we do have quorum.
Good morning. We just had executive. I did exactly the same thing. So excited to start. Good morning, members of the MAG Regional Council. This meeting is now called to order. For those around the table, please turn on your microphone when speaking. For those participating in the room via Zoom, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question or making or seconding a motion. That really does help. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. If you'd like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card located on the information table in the hallway and give it to a MAG staff member. If you parked in the garage, parking validators are available on the information table in the hallway. If you purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. Hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. We will now begin the meeting with a roll call of all members. Andrea?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go down the names of members alphabetically. Please unmute and indicate you are present. Mayor Beck. Mayor Bian Wilner. President Burnett. Thank you. Thank you, President Burnett. Mayor Crane.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Daniels. Mayor Dickey.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Gallego.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Giles. Here. Thank you. Supervisor Goodman. Mayor Hall.
Here.
Thank you, Supervisor Goodman. Mayor Hall.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Hartke.
Present.
Thank you. President Javier.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Hermosillo.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor LaVault.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Governor Roe Lewis.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Meck.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Molina.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Morris. Mayor Osborne. Mayor Ortega.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Pereira.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Peterson.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Pizzillo.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Rodriguez. Mayor Schoaf.
Present.
Thank you. Supervisor Sellers.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Sykes.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Smith.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Walter.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Wires.
I'm here.
Thank you. Chair Weiss.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Wheatley.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Wilson.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Woods. Is there anyone that I missed? Mayor Bian Wilner is here. Thank you. Is there anyone else that I missed? Mr. Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you for that. Before we get to the pledge, today is Administrative Professionals Day, a day when we celebrate the dedicated individuals whose support keeps everything in the lives of public officials, from calendars to meetings to relationships with each other and our constituents, running smoothly. And I think we would all agree that is absolutely the truth. I'm sure the administrative professionals in our respective cities are receiving much thanks and admiration today, but I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge all the administrative professionals here at MAG for the extraordinary work that you do every day in support of regional council, all of the committees, all of our members, all the subcommittees, and our amazing staff. So let me go down the line, and I apologize ahead of time if I butcher anyone's name. Andrea Martinez, just amazing. Angie Debalou, thank you for everything that you do for us. Kathleen Davidson, just a stalwart with what you do. Kathy Shipley, thank you for being here every day. Lisa Young, just another consummate professional. Mimi Bustila, thank you for everything that you do. And Terry Riley, thank you for everything that you do. The work of MAG, its phenomenal impact across our region would not be possible without you. On behalf of the Regional Council, thank you very much. Liz, how'd I do on names? All right, good, thank you. Would you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you for that. Our next item is call to the audience. This is the opportunity for public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda, or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for the call to the audience agenda item unless the committee requests an exception to this limit. I have received one white speaking card. Andrea, is that it?
Yes, that's it. And we have not received any written public comments besides.
Miss Barker, I saw you earlier. Thank you, ma'am. I think you know the routine better than we do. And I saw you riding into here today. I saw where you parked your bike.
Good.
Thank you for that.
Okay, well, it's nice to see you, Mayor Weiss and mayors. And yeah, as I was leaving this morning, I ran into a neighbor who was taking his brisk morning walk. And he says, "Hey, where are you headed?" And I says, "Oh, to give a PSA." He goes, "What? You're going to do a PDA?" And I says, "Hey, Charles," I says, well, maybe I'll do a PDA for a PSA. And he says, "Well, why don't you tell them to bring their water?" He's out already. He is fighting dehydration because we're getting sunny days. Some of you came in your car and may not realize how breezy and dry it is out there. So I wanted to remind you, when I first moved out here in the 70s, my parents had relocated because my brother was an F5 trainer out at Williams and my dad had been Air Force. And, surviving 49 missions flying in World War II, my dad was prepped to save his fellow American service agents with a lot of preparation. And he told me a quick story about being at a gas station in Tempe, and a woman came up and she was out of her car and she was disoriented, like she didn't know. And he looked and he saw it was a California license, and he came over to her and he says, "Ma'am," he says, "is that you're not from here, are you?" He says, "It gets very dry here. I would suggest," and he carried extra water. I do that today. handed her some water. So we know how dangerous it can be. I found people down here and I went over, it was near Banner Hospital. So when I finally got him up and with some water and like that, took him there to be treated by a doctor. And by that time he had left and he apparently didn't want to be recognized and, left to go to the bus. But I'm just saying there's a lot of that. So, when I take extra waters out, I end up drinking half of them, but, I give them out. So that's just a cue. I know that you have public service in your different cities for this, but I'm reminded that. And then also I saw on the news yesterday, we had a 3.6 magnitude earthquake felt over in Banner. That's 4 hours from here. It was a 12-mile earthquake. We can feel them. They don't cause damage until I see that it gets past 5. But there are protections, and maybe we haven't had that much about it. You may be in the area. And, basically you're supposed to get down and kneel. If you're under a table, hold on to that table. If you're in a car, you're supposed to pull over. These all sound sensible, but just as reminders of things that we need to do in an emergency. Thank you.
Ms. Barker, thank you for being here today. Ed, your update?
Thank you, Mayor. First want to say I'm very proud of our MAG staff for the work that they're doing. You guys would be proud of them at the legislature testifying. I was at a breakfast this morning where we presented information on the homelessness plan. Staff at MAG is representing you well, and you should be proud of that, I hope. This is a nice award that Eric Anderson received from the Arizona Transit Association, recognizing really his body of work in supporting transit in the work that he's done here at MAG. And then also people may not remember that Eric actually was the executive director of Valley Metro for a little bit of time as a pinch hitter when they were coming out of a troubling time with the previous CEO. Eric calmed the waters at Valley Metro and set the stage for the current CEO. So Eric, we were proud that he was recognized. He's shown there with Valley Metro CEO Jessica Mefford Miller, who's doing a great job in transit at Metro. Next, please. And we received an award on behalf of you all for MAG's efforts in championing women in transportation from the Women's Transportation Seminar, Arizona chapter. We have a strong contingent of our engineering and professional staff who are members of that, who are doing great work in transportation and engineering. And so congratulations to that staff and to the whole agency for the work that's being recognized there. Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Ed. Eric, any comments on your award?
Well, I appreciate the recognition. As I told when I accepted the awards on behalf of MAG as Employer of the Year in the WTS, it really comes down to our MAG staff, just outstanding.
Oh, Eric, I think we lost your audio. He's saying how much he loves all of you.
He said you're the best director he's
Yeah.
ever seen.
Yeah, he's looking forward to Kate being the new chairman. I think that's what I got out of those lip reading. Eric, we lost the audio a couple minutes in, but we got the general gist.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yep.
Thanks, Eric. Item number 5 is approval of consent agenda. Are there any members of the committee who wish to have an item removed for further consideration or have questions on? Seeing none, can I get a motion on the consent agenda? I have a motion from Mayor Peterson and a second from Mayor Ortega. Okay, Mayor Smith, sorry, and Mayor Ortega, correct? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Do you mind doing a roll call of the members online?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'll go down the list of those participating virtually. Please unmute and indicate how you vote. Mayor Gallego?
Aye.
Thank you. Supervisor Goodman?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Hall?
Aye.
Thank you. President Javier?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Emercio?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor LaVault?
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Molina,
Aye.
thank you. Mayor Pereira,
Aye.
thank you. Mayor Schob,
Aye. Aye.
thank you, Mayor Schob. Mayor Walter, Mayor Walter, Mayor Woods,
Aye.
thank you. One more time, Mayor Walter. Is there anyone that I missed? Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you for that. Ed, next item, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 6 is an update on the ozone non-attainment area. This is an item that some of you have received some input on. I think there's been some misunderstandings or misperceptions about this. So I just want to talk about that for a second. This item comes out of a series that started back in early March when a technical committee reviewed some draft list of measures for ozone attainment. That was a technical committee of MAG. That group reviewed it and passed it forward. The management committee had a base. I asked that we needed to take a step back and talk about what ozone non-attainment is before we got into the details. So the management committee had a presentation on what ozone non-attainment actually is. They viewed the draft list, but there was no action taken. And so we're similarly here because we need to lay a foundation about what is the issue of ozone non-attainment before we get into any sort of process that leads us to measures or actions. So there is a list out there that came through a MAG technical committee, but it is not before you for action today. I'm not sure when it will need to come before you for any action. If it does, we're retaining some legal counsel to help us with that. But we wanted to have the conversation because the more important thing than the measures right now is the issue of the air quality and what the implications for the region as it relates to economic development. So Mr. Franquist is our manager in this area. He has great expertise in this, having served in the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality as their air quality expert there, has come to us. And so we're going to give you a presentation on the subject. It just so happened this presentation was given in a form to a joint committee of the Senate and House that was convened on air quality and energy in Arizona. They had a meeting on Monday, which they invited us to come and give them some foundational information. And so we did make the presentation there. I want to commend Tim and Audra Kester Thomas, who made that presentation. They stood up there under intense questioning from some members for quite a while, and they acquitted themselves very well. I think they gave good information. We try as MAG to be the arbiter or the presenter of facts and data so that policymakers like yourselves, or in this case, the legislature, have a good foundation for making decisions. I want to thank Chairwomen Kerr and Griffin for inviting us to their committee and for the courtesy Chairwomen Kerr and Griffin extended to us in their holding of that meeting. And so today we just want to walk you through this presentation and answer questions because I'm sure you're hearing more and more about ozone, and for good reason, as you'll hear from this.
Ed, Tim, before you start, I want to firstly say thank you and to Audra also, but you're up in front of us right now. I know that day was difficult, and we rely on your expertise and your knowledge to make decisions for this organization. And we believe that others should as well. So I appreciate everything you did. And we love your dedication to this organization.
Chairman, thank you very much. I appreciate those comments. If I think I learned anything yesterday, is keep the mic closer. So hopefully they can hear me today. Great. Unfortunately, our screen's not working here today. So if you kind of see me peeking back and forth, I apologize. It's just a technical hiccup. But with that, I'll kind of jump into it. Bottom line, again, I think this is where we really kind of want to hammer home 4 critical issues. The first is that we are on the fast track to what's referred to as serious non-attainment. The second one here, and I think it's an important point, is ozone is a public health issue, but it also impacts our economy very negatively. The third is that the transit portions of our transportation investments are a critical strategy to meeting our attainment goals. And then lastly, we are going to need to do something in terms of finding meaningful, and I think it's really important to emphasize this, reasonable control measures in order to reduce some level of our ozone. So with that, we'll just kind of jump into the background again. What you can see here in the blue area is the MAG planning area. And what we see kind of coming in here in the outline is the actual non-attainment area for ozone. What again, I often hit this point because I think it's important. This area of non-attainment is the size, almost the size of Connecticut. Again, back east, counties are the size of counties. This, I think, increases the size, the scope, the magnitude of what we're dealing with here, because we're dealing with almost a state level ozone challenge. So again, how is ozone formed? We need two chemicals or pieces of the recipe, if you will. So the first is volatile organic compounds. Those come from wildfires, from some industrial sources, gasoline stations, things of that nature. The second here is oxides of nitrogen. That's typically from fossil fuels. So that's heavy duty trucks, vehicles, and some what they call industrial sources. And again, the key point here is that has to react in the presence of sunlight. So ultraviolet radiation, which again, 330 days here in the valley, it's just a perfect recipe, unfortunately, in this case, for ozone formation. So again, just to really kind of hit this, because I think it often gets lost in the economics and policy discussions, but ozone does impact your health. The stuff we'll see kind of here on the left really impacts pre-existing health issues of folks that may have emphysema, asthma. When we start to hit stuff on the right here, the watery eyes, the coughing, the feeling of the throat on those smoggy days, those actually impact even healthy adults. So I think it's important to note that ozone impacts our health, both whether we have a pre-existing health condition or we're a healthy adult. And I think the last bullet point here too is really important, that it makes our lungs more susceptible to other diseases. That's important, obviously, with the emergence of things like COVID. We just don't need a negative impact to our lungs. So in terms of kind of where we're at today, categorization. So in the Clean Air Act, when we don't meet a health-based standard, in this case, ozone, we get slotted in a specific category. So in the today, our standard is 70 parts per billion. You typically start off at marginal non-attainment. In October of 2022, we were bumped up to moderate. In 2021, we saw concentrations as high as 80 parts per billion. Again, back to the health piece. This is the air that we breathe. This is the air that our children are exposed to, our vulnerable adults are exposed to. And the 75 parts per billion represents if we pull out wildfires, which we're allowed to do under what's referred to as an exceptional event, we still see that we're 5 parts per billion above the standard. In 2022, unfortunately, we see an uptick in both those numbers, 81 parts per billion, just the air that we're exposed to. And then again here, 77 parts per billion if we remove those wildfires. So the unfortunate trend here in our region is that we are seeing an uptick in ozone in the region. So again, in terms of slotting, so getting a little more into the detail of the classification piece. So of course, the best categories that we're in attainment, that's best for public health in our economy. But when that doesn't happen, we usually get slotted in this first category of marginal. And the reason we don't really hear too much about this is there are not a lot of regulatory programs that go along with this, other than it does trigger a new air quality requirement that requires these emission offsets we'll talk about just in a second. If we don't meet that standard in 3 years, we get bumped to moderate. That's where we're at today. That's typically where you start to see this conversation heat up. New regulatory programs are required to reduce ozone to concentrations that do meet that 70 parts per billion standard. And those emission offsets for those new and expanded sources increase at this stage. And I know we've talked about this before, but again, I think this is the bell to really be ringing. Our deadline to meet this moderate area attainment deadline is 2024. Otherwise, we do get bumped to this serious category. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail in terms of air quality permitting. But this is a critical break point in air quality regulations. And when we go from moderate to serious, when we talk about air quality permitting emission offsets, that threshold gets cut in half between moderate and serious. And like I say, we'll go into detail in just a moment. If for whatever reason we don't meet that standard by 2027, we're bumped up to severe. These are the types of programs that we see in California. And then again, if we don't meet that, we're up to the extreme category. So where does this all center out of? So I think it's important to talk about, this is not Tim Franquist's standard. This is not MAG standard. This does come out of the Clean Air Act. So the Clean Air Act sets a pace for what these standards are reviewed on. It's a 5-year pace. The EPA looks at those. The process by which we go through is, again, Clean Air Act mandated. EPA, as I said, sets these standards. So every 5 years, the Clean Air Act requires the EPA to look at the different, what they refer to as criteria pollutants. Ozone is one of those. They typically review the science of that and decide, is it still protecting human health and the environment, or do they need to lower it? The trend has been that they do lower it. Then ultimately, when we do submit a plan, it's the EPA that signs off and approves that plan. Our role is to identify what are those potential different control measures. We obviously don't enforce those measures. We don't advocate for or against them. We simply send out menus of options. I know we'll talk a bit more about what that is. The counties, so a small portion of Pinell that's in the non-attainment area, and then Maricopa County will ultimately take a look within their jurisdiction, what rules make sense to lower emissions there. Then ultimately, as they adopt those, they enforce those. Same with the state. There's things within their jurisdiction, things like clean burning fuels is a state level control. They would take a look at those rules and enforce those rules. Then ultimately, they have the obligation to adopt and submit the SIP on behalf of MAG.
That, if you stop there, Tim, that's a really important slide because there is a misperception that we're trying to address, which is that somehow MAG is going to force something to happen. Fortunately or unfortunately, MAG doesn't have the authority to pass laws or make rules. What we do is that we have the responsibility to be the planning agency for air quality. We, as part of that, then the rules have to be set either by the State Department of Environmental Quality or mostly Maricopa County, maybe a little bit of Pinell. And in some cases, cities may have some role in that as well for things like you may, whatever, electric vehicles or something for your own fleets. But it's really important. And this derives from a federal law. So this is cascading down from a federal law administered by the EPA. We as the planning agency have to do some planning work. And then the rules ultimately are decided by independent local government jurisdictions or the state government where appropriate. So we made that point very clearly on Monday as well.
Thank you. Back up here. So again, as we were just discussing, kind of the Clean Air Act role, the EPA role, every 5 years, the EPA is required by law to take a look at these different standards for ozone. So you can see the 1997 standard, 2008 standard, 2015 standard. Typically, the pattern has been that the EPA is lowering these standards.
And this is also an important slide because this is an area of frustration for many, which is that the standards are moved. And by law, they're supposed to be reevaluated, but our air quality, as you can see, is getting better from 88 parts per billion back in 2000, now down to 75, 76. But as the standards have been adjusted, we do not meet the new standards. So I think that's actually an area of good conversation with the state legislature about that. But the fact is, we don't control that. That's governed by federal law.
That's correct.
As administered by EPA. That's the rules that we're given for the game that we'll talk about a little bit later. But
Great.
Go ahead, Tim.
And Ed was saying, you can see we're trending and still, for the most part, trending in the right direction, really up to about the 2008 timeframe. So the dark line that we could see there is the measured concentrations, if you will, with wildfires. So again, the air that we're breathing, the air that we're exposed to. We did see that dip out there. So we had some good weather in that time frame, a little bit less economic activity. So we saw a dip there during the Great Recession. The green line, and again, I think this is what concerns us all, is that we actually see that uptick. So this is with the wildfires removed. Again, those exceptional events we're allowed to pull for planning purposes. We see an uptick here as well. So again, we have a 7 parts per billion delta associated with this. It's a significant challenge ahead of us. One, again, I think is insurmountable. I think it is a challenge that we can get through, but it is a challenge that, again, we'll certainly be talking more about. Again, just in terms of additional trends, this is Maricopa County. You can see it's again, slight uptick, not what we'd be expecting on a national trend. And this line here for Pinell is the monitor associated with the more urbanized area of Pinell County. And again, it's trending, unfortunately, in the wrong direction as well. So again, not a downtown Phoenix, not a downtown Tempe or urban core. What we can see here, these scatter shot of different monitors throughout the region. Almost all these monitors are showing non-attainment with that 70 parts per billion standard. So it's not just a downtown urban issue. We are seeing it throughout the region. So what have we been doing about ozone? Well, a lot. We have something in the neighborhood of 93 different control measures that have been put in place. And again, you can see to about 2008, those were working very well. These are things that we're probably all familiar and subject to: vehicle emission testing, federal vehicle tailpipe standards, emission controls on major industry, coordinated traffic signals is something we work on here at MAG as what they call a TCM, and traffic control measurement, or the clean burning fuels. And then again, the unfortunate part of this, the brutal reality, is that with 93 measures in place today, we're not likely to meet that moderate area deadline in 2024. So again, the deadlines. So the deadline right now for us is 2024, that we do have to meet that. The challenge is that we do really have to have working controls in this summer. Since the standard was put in the middle of a summer, we have to kind of go in the rear view mirror. So this is why we say it's a very, very low likelihood. I don't want to say it's impossible, but we really have to start seeing ozone reductions in the today. Again, I just will continue to hit the bell on this, that this change from moderate to serious is a significant regulatory change and a significant change in air quality permitting. If we don't meet that standard, we go into serious. Again, that will really have impacts our economy, and something we've been talking with GPAC, AZ Chamber of Commerce about. It's a big concern for them as well. If we don't meet that deadline by 2027, we are now looking at California level controls. I know this scares folks when we do that, but the unfortunate part of this part of the conversation is really California is the only one that has this level of degraded air quality. So they kind of set the floor for what some of these programs look like. So again, not trying to become California here, but the unfortunate part is they've kind of set the bar for these types of programs. So kind of shifting gears away from kind of measures, where we're at, we're background. We'll get just again in a little bit to what is referred to as the emission offset, some of the air quality permitting. And this is what would impact our local businesses. So when you're in a non-attainment area, if you're what's referred to as a new major source, or you're making a major expansion to an existing source, you have to obtain what's referred to as an emission offset. So you have to find emissions that are more than you're putting into the atmosphere, and a bit more than that. You can get those from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality Emission Bank. So if a company went out of business, or a company wanted to put on better controls on an older business and get that change in emission levels, you can bank those and then sell those. Private companies can exchange those credits within each other. But either way, you have to get the emission offsets, get your air quality permit before you can begin operating that facility. So you can imagine that's quite a process, and a bit of a time-consuming process before we get there. So I think this is the real critical piece of this slide here, is in the today, that major source threshold. So that major facility or that major modification only really impacts, for our area, very large sources. So we're looking at power plant level facilities, large new microchip manufacturers. Again, it's probably why we don't hear too much about it while we're at this stage. But as you can see from here, when we go into the serious non-attainment category, that threshold gets chopped in half. So now we're not talking about power plant level facilities, large microchip manufacturers. We're talking about impacts to most industrial business in our region. At that point, if we don't meet that standard, we get bumped up again, that gets chopped in half. And then from there, you can see it just gets more and more challenging. So again, into today, it impacts mostly large businesses. Under serious and forward, it impacts most businesses. So let's kind of walk through a quick real world example. So in the world of tomorrow, serious non-attainment area, the major source threshold is going to be 50 tons per year. A large microchip manufacturer produces 90. So this is actually a real number for the current microchip manufacturer being permitted at 90 tons per year. That was to escape that 100 ton per year threshold. So they didn't trigger those offsets, but under serious, they would. They'd be required to offset 108 tons of their emissions going forward. That would be very, very challenging for them. Data centers, something that we had heard was coming in pretty hot and heavy there for a bit. It's kind of slowed down, but again, kind of another mid-sized business that was a core to our economy. Under the world of serious non-attainment, we have to have 60 tons per year of offsets, and that would be a huge challenge. So again, somewhat alarming, but I think somewhat of the brutal reality. Under serious non-attainment, it's likely that these facilities don't get built in the non-attainment area. Again, it's not to say they don't necessarily come to Arizona, but I think it'd be very challenging. Now, I think the piece to that is some folks will be, that's great, it's coming to my area. As you can see with those standards, as they get lower, the non-attainment area typically expands out. So every time we see one of those changes stand, that could be the case where a facility is somewhat just outside that non-attainment area. And we do see this under a serious non-attainment or a change in standard. Those areas could very well likely be dealing with the same situation. So it's, again, coming out on us, I think, to really kind of catch up to this game. So why are those offsets so challenging? Why is that so hard to actually get those offsets? But the reality in the today is we have no emission offsets in the bank to actually give even one company. And that's just the reality of us not being a heavily industrialized state like Texas or California. We don't have businesses coming and going. We just don't have the emission generations that those areas do. And therefore, this is a very big reality. I know Ed and I have been talking to some of our economic development companies, or excuse me, associations. And they've said the two big things right now for new companies looking in our area: water availability and emission offset. So something that is a big challenge going forward for us, and something I think we can continue to have that conversation on. So in the today, this typically impacts only large sources. Under a serious non-attainment, it's likely to hit most sources. Emission offsets continue to escalate up that ladder, as we saw. There are no emission offsets in the today for those companies. So that's going to have huge implications on new business locates and expansions to existing business in our region. So what's kind of next? So this is a challenging slide. I know it's brought a lot of conversation up, as it should. You can see a lot of our ozone does come from somewhere else. The unfortunate reality from a local planning and regulation standpoint is these are the source categories you can see that we have to work with. So we have local transportation planning, construction industry, those are non-road engines. That 3% is what's referred to as the industrial sources. So you can see it's a pretty limited spectrum of facilities that we get to work with. And it is the unfortunate reality is that we do have to work with that. The background is an issue that we are talking with our Intermountain West partners with. So this is not just an Arizona or regional issue. This is something we see in the background is kind of a Mountain West issue. So again, some more opportunities there to work with our partners, but today this is kind of our situation.
So Tim, back up one click. Okay, so this is an area, again, with the legislature and with all of us, where this is a frustration. It's also a place where we can probably work together at the state and the local level, which is, so the 62% of the ozone we are experiencing is coming from something that we don't control somewhere else. That's frustration, right? We have to put our efforts into the part that we don't control. And so the feeling is, well, we need to go and address that part, the boundary transfer. That's correct. We also, though, need to be working on that right-hand side of that circle at the same time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that had a lot of conversation with the legislature, and appropriately so. It has a lot of conversation throughout the Intermountain West, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Idaho, state of Washington. We all share similar issues of climate, and we're all experiencing, Boise, Denver, Colorado Springs, Salt Lake, we're all experiencing similar situations. So there's also a place for us to be linking with our other MPO partners in those areas, and we've started those conversations.
And I think just to kind of tag the Prop 400 extension piece, only the EPA can change tailpipe standards in California. So when we look at this cars, trucks, that vehicle impact, it makes that local transit. That's the real main local control we have to controlling that largest portion of the pie. There is kind of our Prop 400, or anything we can do to reduce vehicles mile travel in the area. So just kind of a tag there. Again, just to kind of show that this is not just a downtown Phoenix issue. Again, we can see a pie chart here, similar breakdown in emissions. But even out here at the Tonto Mare, this area does get funneled up there. We can see that we're still not showing attainment as far out as this monitor. And again, it's associated with the urban corridor, but it does impact that area. So again, not just a downtown issue, it is something we see in the region. So kind of jumping ahead here. So the unfortunate reality is that we do need to consider reasonable control measures for the area to reduce ozone concentrations. Again, to get the kind of plug there for Prop 400 extension, particularly on the transit portion, is we do get significant air quality benefits from the transit investments. Without those investments and a change in those transit, we have to find additional regulatory programs to kind of backfill what we would be getting from the transit program, and then still have to figure out those other additional regulatory programs to get us down that 7 parts per billion standard. So again, it's just
So our messaging at the legislature has really been, say what you will about Prop 400, but in its entirety, because relieving congestion on roads is important, but the transit component is also important for air quality. It is a significant piece of addressing an ozone problem, is to have a robust and functioning and expanding transit system. So that's another issue we've been raising with the legislature.
And I think we brought it up before, so I'll just say it again because you may hear in different circles. It's on the level of of our vehicle emission testing program. So that impacts about 4 million people in the area. So when we talk about a significant regulatory program that would have to replace it, it's not there. I know we all love the VEI program when we go get our vehicles tested. That's the type of level of program that we'd have to start thinking about to replace it. And then again, we still have that 7 parts per billion that we have to get back to. Just in terms of what are those air quality benefits? Again, no small investment. As you guys know, it's a huge investment in our future. But again, with the congestion mitigation and those air quality benefits, they are huge in lowering emissions here in the area. A big part of our strategy. In terms of bus routes, and again, I think these were the slides that started worrying me as an air quality professional when I started seeing this. The red there shows the bus routes at risk. Of course, if they're not on bus, they're probably looking at a single occupancy vehicle, raising emissions. So again, these investments in our transit are significant. All right, so here's kind of, I think, really why we're starting to have this conversation today. And I think it's important that we hit this. And I don't know if this was landing in the same way on Monday, but I'll say it here again. This is not a planning process that MAG is doing because we've generated it. When we start to look at these host of different control measures, both in the region and outside the region, the EPA's regulation for the 2015 standards, so what's referred to as the implementing regulation, requires a planning organization to look all over the United States of America and basically do a comprehensive search of what's out there. The rule then goes on to say that it's our job to take a look at what is both technologically and economically feasible to select what those measures are. And so I think this is getting lost in the conversation that we're generating huge lists of wildly innovative measures. The bar that we just have to simply pass is reasonable available control measures, but we do have to take a comprehensive analysis across the country, but by no means do we have to implement those. And I think that's a big messaging point because I think that's getting mixed up. It is a rule and a law that we do have to do this per the EPA, but by no means do we have to implement every single measure that's been thought up in the United States. So again, what do those kind of measures look like? They could look like eliminating vehicle idling, federal tailpipe standards, of course, there, diesel retrofit for different pieces of equipment, fleet alternatives, so changing from some kind of fossil fuel to electric, new composting rules, and leaking hoses from gas station pipes, gas lawnmower bans, and then potentially additional controls on power plants.
And again, we're not suggesting that this is what should be done here. We were required to go out and find what is being done elsewhere in the United States as the universe, and then from there start narrowing it down. So that's the point of this one.
Yep. And you can see that most of these measures do impact trucking, construction, and power plants. Again, as I said, we're not advocating for one. We're just checking the box of phase 1 of our regulatory requirements. So again, I think we've probably seen this slide before too, but I think it's important to show. Again, we don't hear too much in marginal non-attainment. We don't see the huge cost. When we start hitting moderate non-attainment, the cost to an area in non-attainment, then we start to see a much more significant rise. So about $100 million per year annually of different impacts. If we jump to serious, that obviously doubles to closer to 250 million. And it just continues to climb from there. So we'll talk in a slide in a second how those are calculated. And that was an older study done in Texas. Newer studies in also Texas showed that we're somewhere between 600 and almost $1 billion. If you do the division here in Oklahoma City, same deal. You're talking about several $100 million per year. These are smaller economies. So I know, Phoenix Metro is a much bigger economy. So I think, that's a concern that every year that we're in attainment, it actually does cost us real world money. How are those calculated? Well, one is like we talked, business can't get emission offsets. So that's business that would not come here. One that I think is important to note is that the mission control equipment obviously is very expensive for a facility to put on. They may not do that. And so what they tend to do is run less shifts. So if they were planning on running 3 shifts, they may go down to 2 shifts. So that means they produce less goods and services, which means they have less tax revenue. So that's an impact to our local area. Again, different construction costs that go along with it, but that's kind of what's baked into those equations. It's a significant hit on our economy in many different levels.
And it was also pointed out to us in a conversation with the legislature, these numbers do not try to attempt to quantify the cost of poor health or deteriorated health. So that's an area we don't have information on, but that was a bit of conversation Monday as well.
Okay, so here's our 3-pronged strategy. So the first and foremost is probably the obvious one. Again, our bar here is reasonable control measures. So again, to work to find what those reasonable control measures are for our area. The second one is we are impacted to some level on international transport, and it's an analysis that we can do, and it is an analysis that is available to us under the Clean Air Act. And the third is then to work with federal partners. As Ed mentioned, we're not the only ones in the situation in the Mountain West. There is some potential for those conversations at the federal level. Again, something we just talked about earlier coming in. So it's a kind of a three-pronged approach, but I think success in any single one of these different areas.
And so just back there. So that third one, we are procuring, contracting with a expert law firm in Washington, D.C. that can help us know how to approach the EPA, where we can push, where we can get attention on those areas that are causing frustration. International transport, how are the rules interpreted, the standards moving over time. So we're trying to take two pathways here on that, and being very careful that we're doing that in a way that keeps us legally sound, but also takes seriously our public health obligation.
And Mr. Chairman, I think an important point on number 3 is that when we've talked to the legislature and even the business community, some of the response we've gotten back is, what if we do these things and it doesn't help? And the argument is, in number 3, when you go negotiate, you need to be able to show what you've done to improve our environment, to try to do everything we can to meet those, meet the air quality requirements. And if we don't have those kind of arguments, then we are wasting our time to even discuss it with them.
Chairman Sellers brings up a really good point. I think we can stomp our feet and tilt at windmills all day long against the EPA. We can do that. We can stand on that hill and shout till our hoarse. Show me where that's been effective in any other region in the United States. It hasn't. So you can work within the system, or you can be Don Quixote and outside the system. And I think what we need to do is work within the system. I think the law firm out of DC is a great first step. I know there's been other steps part of this, but it gives us some clarity on where we can push and where we can't push. So, and I appreciate that.
And then just again, kind of summing up the path that we're on in terms of process. Again, we're checking that first regulatory box of just doing our exhaustive is probably a bad word, a comprehensive analysis of what is out there. Again, we'll continue to winnow that list, have that discussion. But again, just in kind of a nutshell, these are kind of the different control measures out there. The reality, the bogey that we need to hit is we do need to see somewhere in the neighborhood of a 50% reduction in those precursors that we talk about. So VOCs and NOx, not a small number. You can see it's in some cases almost the size of one of those facilities that we talked about daily that we got to reduce. Again, not insurmountable, but definitely a challenge in front of us. So again, as we move through this process, this is kind of where we're at now. We're just doing the analysis portion. Ultimately, what we'll do is have to get commitments back from both the state, the county, and potential municipalities. We'll model those commitments, determine where we are in that 7 parts per billion spectrum. We'll go through that iteration. Eventually, we will have to put in a plan. And I'm remiss because I did not bring this up. And again, not more in the terms of the horror stories that go along with ozone, but I think one of the important pieces that we do have to, I think, really kind of press forward, especially for the legislature, because I don't know that it was landing, is that doing nothing is not an option for us. If we don't do something, in 24 months, the federal government can step in and issue what they call a federal implementation plan. So they will pick those measures for us. If we submit a plan that doesn't get approved and they disapprove it, that puts us into a transportation conformity freeze instantly. So this is a typical case where no action is actually action, but it's given up our local control on that. So again, we'll want to find a plan that helps us move forward. And then obviously, once we figure out what that plan is, we begin implementing those controls and seeing ozone reductions.
So this was a point we made with the state is, if we don't do it ourselves, it will be done unto us by Region 9 in San Francisco. So we think it's always better to have our own local control on that and press forward on it. I think there's another place of frustration, and that again, it's a place to address it, is the moving of us from marginal to moderate was effective in 2021, but we weren't communicated with until 2022. So EPA has been slow in getting us information, but yet our deadline is 2024 based on the 2021 non-attainment, not the 2022 information. So there's another area of conversation and pushing. We need to have. How successful we'll be, we don't know. But again, that was pointed out also at the legislature. And so that's another place where, again, having some assistance with people who know how to navigate EPA is going to be really valuable to us as we try to find avenues to have a conversation about this.
So I'm going to ask the committee. Thanks, Ed. I'm going to ask the committee. Tim, go ahead and finish up where you need to be. And then I know I'm looking around the room and there's questions. So I want to make sure that we get the questions so you guys can answer.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. I think I just kind of land on this bottom line slide, just kind of bring us back full circle again. As Ed said, we're on kind of the fast track to serious non-attainment. Ozone is a public health and economic negative impact. Transit investments are part of our attainment plan to meet this standard. And then again, just what we discussed, if we do nothing, EPA will do it for us. 24 months, the FIP, there's sanctions at 18 months. There's lots of that the federal government can do. Again, this is meant to be done at the local level. So the Clean Air Act actually wants this process to be in place. However, we don't. Unfortunately, there are hammers that the EPA can use. So I'll kind of land there because like I said, I know there's plenty of questions.
Always end on a high note. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate that. Chairman Sellers.
Yeah, I think one of the most important points I want to make here is that Tim and John and Audra have been on the firing line on presenting this information to help us get 400E across the finish line. And the reason that presenting this information to all of you is so critical is because they need to have complete support from this group going forward if we're going to accomplish this. You know, the attacks on them at some of these meetings has been merciless, and we really all need to stick together. Thank you.
Chairman Sellers, one of the comments I made in executive committee was, for 58 years, my first gut feeling has been when I feel someone I care about or someone I respect or someone I work with has been attacked wrongly, is to attack back. It's the wrong method. It's the wrong path. It's the wrong way to get where we need to be with Prop 400. What you're seeing is a concerted effort to try and to divide the committee. Let's remember, 4 years of working on this, back and forth. I see Mayor Pizzillo here. I remember his predecessor, just eloquent and poignant and bringing the committee together to get where we needed to be. And I will tell you that as the mayor of Avondale, I'll be damned if I let a staffer try and divide us from the legislature. That's not going to happen in here. And I would ask you guys, just like Chairman Sellers is, just rely on the information that we have here, trust and go with what we're hearing because it has proven to be truthful over many, many years. And I think it's a very moderate approach. Mayor Pizzillo.
You know, I had mentioned it at the last meeting. My biggest concern, and I don't know how you convince our legislature of this. This is an excellent presentation, is convincing our legislature that when they go back and forth, tweak this, tweak that, are they really going to get to the attainment in which where the bill that Ducey vetoed, my understanding is, that did meet the requirements. And I don't know what the odds are of you convincing them to just pull that one back up and vote as opposed to keep tweaking something. Because my biggest fear is they're going to keep tweaking it to the point that it's going to go back to the federal and they're going to say, no, you made it worse than what you did on the first time and we don't get it. So somehow you got to convince them how important this is. They like putting things off to the last minute, and you can't put it off to the last minute because you can't change that fast. So if they're not convinced of this, they're going to be a real big push uphill on us.
And
trying to
Joe,
get this done.
and Joe, I think what we've done is, when we've heard that MAG has been inflexible in their approach to getting this legislature. Over 20 concessions were made by this organization to help get this plan through. And that's why the buckets, the percentages for each bucket are so crucial, including light rail. Because you're right, we could have a plan that gets approved by the legislature, may get vetoed by the governor, but wouldn't pass a federal overview. And then we're starting over again with a much different political environment in 24 than it is in 23. So I would agree. And that's why you see us holding fast to those allocations in those buckets. And I think that's important. Mayor Harkey.
Thank you. So, and maybe you can help me. I thank you for this presentation. I understand as much as I can understand of it. But it seems to me that if the entire state of California and 23 major significant communities around this country are in a similar boat, largely because the ozone levels are being lowered and then being forced to attain that, our only solution, regardless of what efforts that we do make, is going to be a federal effort. And is there not some pushback on EPA from probably half the Congress and Senate, regardless of what title or moniker they have, D or R, to say, hey, at some point, there has to be a relook at this. I mean, if it's impossible, almost impossible, or extremely arduous and difficult to reach this, regardless of whatever efforts we take, I mean, that ought to send some kind of a message that says we need to look at this rather than EPA being able to set the line. So tell me what again, my question is a metered frustration, I suppose, and just even almost shaking my hands, but it does almost see that with so many communities and there's no question so many more that will be coming into the same ballpark that we're in. What is being addressed or looked at with the EPA standards rather than just the mandates from EPA on communities like ours?
Chairman and members of Regional Council, I think it's a great question. I think it's something we're going to have to come across, because when you show that slide of emissions coming from outside the area, it's just going to beg the question, okay, so what do we do to control that? So I think the three-pronged strategy, really articulates the one is if we do something, as Supervisor Seller says, okay, now we at least have shown reasonable steps forward. The international transport is something I think, again, we're going to be talking about heavily with our Intermountain West partners. That is a very real thing. We know the EPA's modeled that. We think that number is a little bit lower. So 2 parts per billion of that 7 parts per billion is what they're saying. EDQ, the state, is modeled that somewhere around 4. But again, we have to kind of take those steps first to show we did something. Then we can kind of step into that space where we do the international transport demonstration. But I do think there is very real groundswell around that background issue. What shape and form that takes, I think it's so new that, again, even our Intermountain West partners are just now starting that conversation. So there is a conversation to be had. There is groundswell on that background conversation. Again, what specifics that take, I think, again, that's what the working group I'm on right now with them is to move past studying this. So I think what ends up happening is every few years we get new folks involved. International transport and background becomes a new issue. I think our propensity is to study this. So there's many different studies are already out there. And I think that was a propensity for the Intermountain West group is let's go study this again. We do have a 2019 federal study that's looked at background. There's another study out there from kind of the who's who of environmental and air quality professionals in 2018. So I think we have a body of science that says we know it's background. I think what we need to work on next is what are those actual policy recommendations that we can coalesce around that are still protective of human health and the environment, but truly recognize this issue of background. So again, I don't have specifics on that today, but I think as 23 of our areas start to go this route, several of those in the Mountain West, that groundswell for some kind of reasonable relief there is certainly happening.
And I should also just add, it's important to note in terms of your awareness of the situation, there are a large number of groups who are not on board with the idea of pushing back on EPA. Public health groups, nonprofits that are focused on air quality and public health will go and point to the clean air law and push equally as hard about needing to meet those standards. So there's crossing currents here of folks who are going to be pushing back on whatever we do.
Jeannie?
Thank you. Couple things, just real quick on page 39. Would you check? Can I check something that I thought I saw? That was just a few slides back. It looked like we had to reach 50% by August of 23. Is that what we have to do?
Yeah, Chairman, members of Regional Council, in the parade of horrors that kind of come with this, because the deadline is in August of 2024, so we call this the ozone season because it falls kind of still in the middle of an ozone season. It's a rear view mirror that the EPA will be looking at. That's a legal precedent, so it's unfortunately a challenge that I know I've talked with staff about. Is this don't seem fair? The reality is there is case law right now that says we have to actually look to the summer of 2023 to get these measures in. So this is why we're trying to be just very candid about the serious area bump up. It's a very, again, miracles happen, things could happen. I do think there still needs to be a sense of urgency because the faster we can get back into attainment, the faster we can get out of serious non-attainment, the better. So we don't want to discourage folks to lose any kind of sense of urgency here, but but you caught it correctly. The very real reality is we have to start seeing emission reductions happening really kind of almost now, but certainly by August of this summer. But
And Chair, so about the 62%, and that wasn't including wildfires. Is it just a whole bunch of different areas? I mean, when you mentioned Denver and all these other places, are they contributing to that 62%, or are they quote unquote victims of it like we are? And then this is something just from years and years ago at DEQ with dust and, if they're exceptional, but we're still breathing it. So how do you reconcile that? But again, the first question, I was a little bit wanted to confirm what the 62% was from.
Chairman, members of the regional council, it's kind of a mixed bag when we call it ozone. It's a kind of complicated definition, but I'll give you the simple one, which is partly international transport, partly portions of our state contributing to that, and then portions of other states contributed. So it's referred to as interstate, international, but it is a mixed bag. So the wildfires are actually its own separate category, but that is air quality kind of in a mixed bag. So again, that's why I think the groundswell is there. We see that same thing across the West. So in some cases, other states do contribute. We don't right now, at least according to what's called a good neighbor provision. So there is another type of air quality plan that the state has to do to ensure California is not impacting us. We're not impacting others. East Coast has a whole nother program on ozone because they do that. They do pass it down the line. Luckily, we're not subject to that program. So for us, we don't have impacts necessarily on other states. So we are impacted by other states, at least right now, according to that good neighbor provision. Other states may not have that, so we'd have to look into kind of their provisions. But I think the brutal reality is that we know from natural sources, from other states, and international transport. And I think that's the big one, especially in the West. We are impacted by, at some level, by sources outside the United States. That's kind of where we're starting to see that groundswell.
So Tim, when you talk international transport, we're talking China, Mexico, large manufacturers that as wind blows, as everything else happens, it gets transported across the United States.
Chairman, members of the regional council, that's correct. So when we talk about those precursors, ozone tends to break down overnight. It's not a very stable molecule, but those precursors, they can be transported across an ocean. So we have animations that will show those typically NOx that will travel. It's difficult because then it hits California, and then it gets into what we refer to as, in Mexico, we have what's referred to as an emissions inventory. We kind of know what industry is making. We can kind of zero that out. We don't have those same things for East Asia. And so you have to kind of start doing some data substitution. Obviously, that gets us into some challenges. So the complexity increases. But again, from models from both EPA, state, and even ours, we do know international transport's a very real thing in our area.
We good? I'm going to go to Mayor Gallego and then Mayor Ortega. Kate.
Thank you so much. As we were talking today, I was thinking it would be good to have as much Arizona specific information as possible. Would it be worth contracting with an economist to study our economic impact and also perhaps some health professionals to address what Mr. Zerker said, that the legislature said we weren't talking about numbers from health impacts, just so we can have real numbers that are specific to our region?
Ed?
Chairman Weiss, Mayor Gallego, members, yes, I think we can see what is possible in terms of getting more data for this. I think that's going to be critical to us. I think we'll work with our contracted attorney in Washington, and also maybe there's something with universities or something where we can get some more expertise on this. More hands, the better.
Kate, does that work for you? Is that filling in what you wanted to have done?
That is perfect. Thank you.
Safe travels.
And Chairman, if I may add to that point, Arizona State right now is looking at this issue. So we do have kind of a local study that is going on, but to the health piece of it, we don't have any local data on that.
Mayor Ortega?
Well, from a perspective that the legislature understands and we all deal with in our own municipalities, it is what is at risk And when we look at either straight up economic development or our well-being and health of our constituents, I kind of equate, I'm just going to add another angle because I agree with many things that have been said here. So I think that if we look at this with the same urgency as water, energy, pollution, transportation are all interconnected. And when investment halts in water or transportation or energy infrastructure, then they can only get worse. And I think that is where there was response by the previous legislature to the question of water. Although I thought desalination, way offshore was not the way to go. We did recognize it and they put some money behind it. Now, in this case, we're looking at our buy-in of understanding the problem and that, frankly, halting infrastructure halts all development. And any infrastructure should have multiple benefits, not just 1 + 1 = 2, but 1 + 1 = 3. And that's really what we try to do in Scottsdale. And I think that kind of motivation goes beyond whether or not it's, no new taxes, no new whatever, and that stagnation that will, make it get worse. I am, committed to touch base with our legislators in a positive way. And I know that there've been some technical problems with the voting quorums and so forth, but we'll get through that. And we have to attack this with the same energy that we are concerned with about water in the state. Thank you.
Mayor, I appreciate your offer on that. Mayor Hall?
Mayor, hey, Tim, I've got a question for you. There was one slide that you presented some time ago that showed all the stations throughout Maricopa County that are measuring stations. Is that true?
He's getting to there now. That one?
Yes. Is there a way to get measurements to rise, but I would say all the cities, I mean, there's a tendency to get done what get measured, I have no idea what our measurements are. I'm surprised. That station out there. Is there a way that we could get individual feedback?
Tim's nodding his head, so I'm gonna let him elaborate.
Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council, absolutely. Actually, the Maricopa County Air Quality Department runs most of these. A handful of them are Arizona Department of Air Quality as well, but they all have real-time measurements with historic data on them. So I could either send those to you directly if folks are interested.
That'd be great. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Skip. I'll see you tonight.
Okay.
I think it'd be helpful just to, as we do the legislative update on Fridays through Nathan, just when that information is available, just to reference everyone on that so they have it. Because to send out individual ones, I know you've got, that's just a lot. So, and it's good reading material when you're having a glass of wine or beer, I think. Let me go to Julia and then to Mayor from Paradise Valley.
There we go. That we are governed by federal law and we are the planning agency. And to speak to the local control, it's much better. It's much better for us to be able to be that planning agency than the federal implementation plan that we may be faced coming out of San Francisco, which I can't anticipate would know better than Arizona than we do ourselves. And just speaking to, we were just briefly talking about emails that have been coming in. And so it's good for our residents to realize that just how this works. But with the menu of options, I just wanted to speak to that real quick, because I think there are some in that menu that are a bit alarming to residents. And so we just want to make sure that they are they have a reasonable chance to be implemented through the state, through the county, and also having the least impact to our residents. So I think there's a few that we could probably just eliminate initially, but also recognizing that these are practices that we put together a menu of options that are used throughout the country. And so just recognizing we're governed by federal law. I think just to have a bit more understanding and a surety for the residents themselves. But to speak to, I appreciated Mayor Harkey, your comment that you brought up, and in the slide, 50% reduction by essentially this summer, and then realizing 62% is from outside of our region's control, but really just strongly encouraging us to work with our congressional delegation and pushing back, to your point, Mayor Harkey, on the EPA as far as getting to a level that is actually attainable. So just a couple thoughts. Thank you.
And I would tell you, we've had conversations with Congressman Stanton, who has a bill out there regarding energy credits, almost like a CDBG, but with energy. He is cognizant of what you're talking about. And obviously, as the former mayor of Phoenix, I think there's an ally there. And I think there's other allies in the Arizona legislature, or I'm sorry, in the congressional realm. But I think Congressman Stanton is sympathetic to what we're going through. Jerry?
Not speaking to the mic. Thank you. I certainly support, that there's a tremendous amount of expertise and care in this room, both at the elected and staff level, and really appreciate the clarifications. And there has been some confusion. And what I've heard throughout this process for multiple years is that there's a federal mandate that we do certain things or they are done to our region. And those are the choices that were given from the federal level. So just to the point of, and I think Mr. Zerker and the staff did a great job explaining this, there seem to be a lot of roadblocks and impediments to doing our best work for our individual communities and as a region. And if in the meantime, I think if there's a way to, and if I'm alone on this, we'll do our best to tackle it. But if there's a way to get a fact sheet, maybe even a website page that's directed towards ordinary citizens, that explains at a high level some of the things that were discussed, including links to specifics if they want to take a deep dive. That would certainly help me to be able to direct people to that, to explain some of the things that were stated in terms of even, when I hear ozone, people may think ozone layer, this is an environmentalist issue, when really it's ozone that people breathe, things of that nature that could just spell things out. And in my opinion, that may help us all, at least on common facts, as was discussed earlier, which I agree with, speak with the same set of facts, because I think I could explain or try to explain most of this. I wouldn't do it as well as professional staff. And that would certainly help me, I think, allay concerns, because even at the outset, when I was getting citizen outreach and was able to explain, MAG does not have legislative authority over the town of Paradise Valley. That got the temperature down. And I know that and I really appreciate the work of the executive committee and others that are in these negotiations and staff to try to create options that then we can all do our best work together on. But just perhaps working on that promptly would help address some of that from us. And I certainly can understand why citizens might feel concerned, but the federal constraints and maybe even who they could talk to at the federal level, if they want to express their opinions on policy that we certainly can't control and that we're actually talking about how we can have influence on. So I'll yield with that. Mr.
No, Jerry, I think that's great. Jerry had emailed me earlier in the day, and I gave you a metaphor of the strategy. But I think having information that counteracts false information or accusations or not even half truths is important, because there's always going to be a group that will never believe what government says. We've all encountered that in our cities. And I don't think that's the group we're trying to reach. We're trying to reach that resident, that citizen who says, listen, I get it, but I'm hearing this. They want that truth. They want that fact. And I think that, Ed, I think saw you taking notes. I think that helps us. It's another resource for our cities. So if we can get that together. And Jerry, do you mind, since you brought this up, Ed, do you mind sending that, or when you guys get something like that, that fact sheet, send it to Jerry. That way there's a deep dive, but let's not get too far in the weeds initially. If there's a link that they can click on, like you're saying, it'll take them deeper, but it was Jerry's idea. Let's see what we can do with that. Mayor Peterson?
Madam
Chairman.
Chair, Madam Chair, Madam Chair, I was back in the legislature.
And
Mr. Chairman.
Hey, what happened?
We are working right now to Mayor Ben Wilner's point, which is a good one. We're working on a YouTube video of the presentation so that it would be available on our website. So we're trying to refine that down because there's a lot there. But I like the idea of also getting a fact sheet and just continuing to expand the universe of our information available for folks. So we will work with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, order is Bridget, Nancy, and then John.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to ask you to go back to slide 39. I think sometimes it's just the way we tell our own story. And when we were in the executive committee meeting, I actually asked if there was a way for MAG, if we would like for MAG to come out to our cities, towns, and do a presentation to our councils, because sometimes it's easier to get the information out at the local level and let them hear it at the local level. But when I look at this slide, if I'm a resident, this is what you want me to vote on today. Suggested list of measures. So if there's a way that we make sure that when we're telling the story, that it's potential measures that are available. It's just a different tone.
We're
Ones that have
going
been
to
recommended
rename
throughout
that
the United
list.
States.
Excuse me. Yeah. Yes. A draft of things we found, whatever that is, but a suggested list says to me, this is what you're taking to the committee. So just how we tell the story, it's all about how we tell the story, right? And again, coming out to our cities and towns, it might be a better way for us to be able to get that information out at the local level. I know it's hard to combat groups that are out there spreading the misinformation before we even have an opportunity to hear it and to talk about it. But like Ken said, yeah, we just want to fight back, but it's really not the best way to do it. The best way is for us to sit here together and talk about it, because we are the grownups at the table, Ed. I think maybe you said that earlier, and we should be able to have these conversations. So I appreciate that. So just those little pieces of feedback. And I love that Jerry suggested a fact sheet or a landing page for people to be able to go to.
Thanks, Bridget. Nancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I really appreciate the mayor of Queen Creek and your comments regarding our residents and wanting to be careful. I also would put that same caution on how we impact businesses and finding the least way to impact businesses. And I know that's going to be challenging, but those are two major concerns. What I'm struggling with is on this chart, I think you have the pop-up then that says 50%. And so that's 4 months away. So help me understand what we're doing between now and then without implementing all of those guidances or restrictions. What are we going to do in this 4 months or what's happening? That part I don't understand. Thank you.
Chairman and members of the Regional Council, that's a great question. The one good thing is we do have those 93 measures still working. There are federal measures that are helping us that are just implemented through a federal process. This, as you said, it's daunting. It's a scary number. That's kind of what this conversation is. Okay, so what measures? And again, I think it's really hard. Or I think it's a really good messaging point is it's got to be reasonable. So the law just says we got to be reasonable, not super innovative, not go overboard. So again, and we learned that lesson the hard way. We are definitely going to change the name of this list. It was just meant to be just that phase one of a research project, but duly noted, we will certainly do that. But the good thing is we do have those 93 measures working.
So those are measures we're currently working on and have been over time. And do we expect anything new to come into play in the next 4 months that I'm not aware of? And I'd be interested in hearing about that if that's the case.
Chairman and members of Regional Council, I'm not aware of anything over the next 4 months.
Okay.
There are some new heavy duty diesel emission standards, vehicle emission standards coming in place. They're still a little bit further out there. You probably read that
From whom?
I'm sorry, from the federal government.
Okay.
They are looking at a kind of real big push. There's no shock on electric vehicles. Again, I think that's a 2032 target. So I think that's some of the challenge we're having is that stuff will help over time, but it's not going to help in the today. So I think that's the challenge that we have ahead of us. There are some relief coming, love them or hate them, however you look at those, but those programs will reduce ozone, but I don't think we'd expect those impacts somewhere to around the 2025, 26, and then maybe as far out as 2030.
And Mayor Smith, to your point, I think that's a point of conversation we need to have in Washington with EPA about this timing, not seeming reasonable to a reasonable
Right,
person.
Right.
We find out in 22 that it's retroactive to 21, it's due in 24, but it's measured in 23. And here we sit, right? That's, and again, another reason why we need that expertise in Washington to help us know how to effectively address that while we continue to work on the measures. But
Perfect.
Yeah.
And with the trajectory of the 93 things that are currently being done, do we see reaching this? And if not, what happens at that point?
Mr. Chair and members of Regional Council, I think in steady state, I don't know that we would hit that number. As you can see, we're seeing that
Thank
uptick,
you.
unfortunately.
Okay.
So yeah, the unfortunate reality is, again, we don't have to do everything on the list. It was really just a starting point. And again, to those kind of firebrand issues that are on there, that's what this whole process is about. We can scrub that list. We can, start over again. So just an opportunity for us to start that discussion. But again, I think just opportunity for us to keep ringing that bell. It was never meant to be a list of implementation, simply checking the box of the regulatory requirement we have is just to throw a huge net out there and then just winnow that down to what is reasonable in this area. Knowing that, again, what's reasonable in this area is not necessarily reasonable in other areas.
Nancy, I think what happens is after August, I mean, we're all realists here. We look at that number and we think, my daughter's wedding is in 30 days and
Right.
I'm trying to, my wife, I want to lose 20 pounds between now and then. That's not happening, right? So all day long we could talk about it, but it's not happening. Difficult number to reach. I think the strategy happens between now and then after. What are those conversations with EPA? And that step is to help us mitigate this in the future is what Ed's talking about as the attorney. And we're looking at this list and everything else. So, I don't think on September 1st, we're going to have a party celebrating that we reach this. Be great if we did, but it's a strategy.
Of
After.
more concern on September 1st, I'm not going to see anything hugely devastating to our communities, right? In regards to
Your water bill's paid? No, we're talking about 24 and then 25.
Yes.
Correct?
Okay,
It's
perfect.
24.
Just want to make
And
sure.
this committee will have the opportunity to discuss those issues. And as Jerry brought up too, and we discussed, individual cities will take the information that we give you, not we, but the committee gives, and you'll do that on your own. But it's a great clearinghouse for information and gives you some strategies to kind of go with. Mayor Giles?
I really endorse what everyone's been saying on this, and I think our natural kind of maverick Arizona reaction to this is, well, and we're hearing from a lot of people outside of this room and inside this room is, hey, we need to push back to the EPA. Let's go to the mat on this. And so I appreciate the legal advice that we're going to pursue to just see what the lay of the land is there. The economic consequences of this situation are self-evident and are very compelling, and I think will help us motivate ourselves and others to rise to this challenge. But I hate to, it seems like we're glossing over the first point of the presentation, which is there are health consequences associated with this ozone non-attainment. And I'm anxious to learn more about that. And I'm not sure, I know you mentioned that we just don't have that data. And so I would like to know more about that just on another level, to help me motivate myself and others, perhaps. Here's another reason we ought to look at this.
Hey, can we schedule that for sometime in the near future?
Yes.
Anyone else? We still have items on this agenda. So if we don't mind, we're going to kind of move on to the next item. Tim, again, thank you.
Absolutely.
Guys,
Thank you.
incredible presentation. And number 7, please.
Mayor, this is just a quick update on where we stand with our 911 study committee efforts. Again, to remind you, it is a study committee chaired by the city managers of Mesa and Glendale, involving many of your members. And Audrey Skidmore our IT director, will give the presentation.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I just want to provide a quick update on the status of the consultant project. If you remember, this was to assess kind of where we are and what we value out of our 911 system, what the current technologies are, and come up with a set of recommendations for how to possibly move forward. We have completed the first task. We did 58 interviews where we met with PSAP managers, our oversight committee members, and city managers to understand what people want out of the 911 system and what the values are. We've moved on to the second task, the current and emerging technologies. We have 5 peer agencies that we are going to be interviewing and working with to find out about what they're using. We're also assessing other technologies available. We will have our initial report on those first 2 tasks May 12th. And then our final report with the recommendations, will come June 9th. And in the interest of time, Nathan, do you have anything? or-
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, members of Regional Council, so obviously the consultant process is underway. We encourage you to kind of look for the results of that for further conversation regarding the future of our 911 system. So we appreciate that. We've had ongoing conversations with Arizona Department of Administration, of which the 911 office is housed. Those have been productive conversations. We have more conversations to come. ADOA has come to our PSAP Managers Committee and presented, as well as our study committee. So all this is a long way of saying, based on the consultant report, conversations with the ADOA will be in a better position to map our 911 future. We hope that you all hang in there with us. We've had a number of member agencies submit statements of intent to depart MR 911. Again, looking for everyone to hang tight. In fact, ADOA said they will not entertain or accept those statements of intent to depart MR 911, seeking managed services from the state. So again, just asking everyone to hang tight, let our process play out.
Any comments from the committee? Any comments from anyone online? Thank you, Nathan. Ed, item number 8, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is budget update number 48, I think. Amy Effley.
Thank you, Chair and members of the MEG Regional Council, for letting me present today on the fiscal year 24 and 25 biennial unified planning work program and budget. So since January, we have been providing draft updates for the with the final draft being presented next month for recommended approval. This month, we are providing a revised draft of the member dues and assessments. The current changes include allocating the 911 special assessment of the $92,416, which was added for the independent review of the region's 911 system, to all of the current active member agencies. However, we will be updating the current draft to include Gilbert and Paradise Valley for fiscal year 24 only. Due to the transition period of their departure, they'll be included in that. This month, we are also proposing staff salary increases to be most careful with our resources during our uncertainty of the Proposition 400 extension. MEG is recommending a two-step approach to employee compensation changes for fiscal year 24. MEG is recommending a proposed cost of living adjustment of 1.5% for all staff that is in place as of July 1st. The COLA will apply to interns, new hires, as well as staff who recently received a promotion. The salary ranges for all positions will also be extended by the 1.5% accordingly to ensure all staff who are currently at the maximum salary will also receive the COLA. Although MEG staff will participate in the annual performance evaluation review, MEG is recommending that we refrain from granting performance-based salary increases at this time. The employee performance evaluation process provides an important opportunity to discuss staff achievements, identify opportunities for growth, and obtain feedback about how staff can be best supported. Leadership may reevaluate the possibility of performance increases further into the budget cycle based on the funding availability and the status of the Prop 400 extension efforts. MEG continues to make progress on the final UPWAP and budget and brief documents for recommended approval next month. And that concludes my discussion today. For information and discussion, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Amy, we'll see you at number 49, correct?
Yes.
Ed, do you want to comment on this at all?
No, Mayor, I think.
Any comments from the committee? I would ask if you have any questions, and for more detail, get with Amy or Ed on this. Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it. Next item. Nominating committee. So I'll read the statement so I don't miss anything. Annually, the chair of the MAG Regional Council appoints a 5-member nominating committee from the Regional Council in accordance with the approved MAG Regional Council nominating process. The nominating committee develops a slate of 7 candidates. These candidates include a chair, vice chair, treasurer, the past chair, and the 3 members at large. The nominating committee is required to provide a balanced slate of officers. The slate is forwarded to all the Regional Council members at least 2 weeks prior to the annual meeting in June. A report on the members of the nominating committee will be provided at the regional council meeting. This year's members of the MAG nominating committee are as follows. Tempe Mayor Corey Woods, Glendale Mayor Jerry Wires, Litchfield Park Mayor Tom Schoaf, Paradise Valley Mayor Jerry Bean Wilner, and Fountain Hills Mayor Ginny Dickey. I would like to thank these members for agreeing to serve on the nominating committee. A memo will be sent out following the meeting requesting nominations for MAG officers and members of the executive committee, and will include details on the process. The regional council will vote on the executive committee members in June. Any comments from anybody? Okay. Anybody online? That was it, folks. Item number 10. John, are you doing it?
Good morning, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the MAG Regional Council. I will try and be brief in my remarks, though, make sure that I am robust in covering all the information. So today's focus is on the extension of Proposition 400. I will specifically focus on the two bills that are still alive at this point in session. Both bills have passed out of their respective committees with a commitment from the bill sponsors to hold stakeholder negotiations in order to try and drive a consensus piece of legislation. So I'll first start with SB 1102. This is legislation sponsored by Representative Livingston, the Appropriations Chair in the House of Representatives. The underlying bill is a Senator Carroll bill. Of course, Senator Carroll was a bill sponsor of last year's legislation. The bill that passed out of committee did not align with the approved regional plan. Namely, the allocations did not match the plan allocations. In addition, there were a number of non-transportation related provisions which were concerning. We did participate in a stakeholder meeting with Representative Livingston. A draft amendment has been circulated to that stakeholder meeting. Pleased to report that the non-transportation provisions would be pulled out of that. However, there is still inconsistencies with the plan. And in addition, some prohibitions that impact our flexibility and ability to implement the plan. That being said, particularly on the Senate side, it has been made clear that there is very limited viability for this bill moving forward. Messages conveyed from the Speaker, from the President of the Senate, have indicated that the only Prop 400 extension bill that the Senate President is willing to entertain is the next bill that I will talk about here shortly. That bill is SB 1246, passed out of the House Transportation Committee with a strike everything amendment by Representative Cook, the House Transportation Committee Chair. The underlying bill is a Senator Farnsworth bill. Senator Farnsworth is the Senate Transportation Chair. Excuse me. The bill that passed out of committee is inconsistent with the regionally approved plan. The allocations, namely, do not align with the plan approved by this body. However, the underlying legislation is structurally sound, although there were several concerning provisions, including a prohibition on projects that reduce vehicle lane miles. We have been an active participant in stakeholder discussions over the last month and a half or so. It has provided a very good opportunity for us to educate and inform the legislature. We have made progress in terms of that education effort. However, we still do have a ways to go. Specifically last Thursday, the Senate Majority Party proposed their recommended or their draft legislation for review. That legislation was further revised with a copy that was distributed at the stakeholder meeting yesterday. Those allocations for that legislation are on the screen. They are inconsistent with the regionally approved plan. Freeways are roughly 10% higher. Arterials and programs are roughly 3% lower. And transit is roughly 7% lower than the regionally approved plan. There are a number of other concerning provisions in there. It precludes funding for all light rail, not just light rail extensions, but also the capital rehabilitation of light rail. As a reminder, that's an asset that the region has invested billions of dollars in. Private development has also invested millions of dollars along the corridor, and that funding is needed to keep that system in a state of good repair. It also restricts certain projects from being funded, inconsistent with the plan. Projects like active transportation projects, places new restrictions on other projects, vehicle lane mile restrictions, as I had mentioned before. And perhaps two of the other relatively new but equally concerning provisions in that legislation is it expands the role of the legislature in the management and implementation of the regional transportation plan or an approved investment plan, with a joint legislative committee that reviews certain changes in certain projects. In addition, it places a number of new performance requirements on transit. We are still digesting those, but there are some open questions about the technical feasibility of those. Needless to say, they do not align with our regional transportation plan, and certainly the successes that we've had as a region over the last 40 years to build one of, if not the best transportation systems in America. We do continue to engage with Governor Hobbs. Governor Hobbs held a stakeholder meeting late yesterday afternoon. Several of you all participated in that. Of course, the chairman is the representative of MAG, Mayor Giles, Supervisor Sellers. At that meeting, the governor continued to reaffirm her commitment to this issue, to Prop 400, and support of the regional plan. We continue to work on this issue. We continue to work to emphasize all the work that you all did in putting together the regional plan. And we'll continue to work with the legislature to try and find solutions. So with that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions.
John, thank you. Any comments from the committee? Anyone online? Seeing none? Oh, I'm sorry, Julia, I'm sorry.
I'll get one of these. Thank you. Under the Senate proposed amendment here on SB 1246, how are our arterial projects impacted based on the changes from 22.2% to 19% based on our MAG's plan?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Regional Council, that's a good question. So essentially, under the Senate's proposal, what they are doing is certainly there was some legislative concern over the 25-year term. That's one of the big areas that we've worked with the members of the legislature to try and find consensus. And in order to accommodate that, we've worked with them to come up with a 20-year sales tax term where we would only fund the first 20 years of our plan. We can still keep the full 25-year plan. So what the Senate is proposing is that we advance the last 5 years of freeway and arterial projects into the funded 20-year plan to be able to accommodate that advancement. They are crowding out a combination of transit as well as some of our regional programs. So some of those future commitments that we have to areas like intersection improvements where we don't know what improvements will be needed in 5 years, let alone 20 years, crowding out other important investments like emerging technologies, active transportation, certainly. So overall, it does deviate from our plan and certainly crowds out some of the priorities that this body has articulated.
Thank you for that.
Can I make one quick comment, Shannon?
Sure, Bridget.
I was driving here today, and having been born and raised in Massachusetts, which is probably one of the worst places in the country to drive. I've lived in Arizona for 28 years, and I still, when I'm on the freeway and I hit certain points and I take a look around and I think, man, we did this right. So kudos to everybody that's been part of that for all these years, because driving on the freeways here, I don't even mind driving into Phoenix to see all of you. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. I just thought it should be said.
Did you want to rephrase that last statement?
I love seeing you, Ken.
Okay, beautiful. Anyone?
Question.
Mayor Harkey?
Yeah. John, just related to the transit, again, I'm a former Valley Metro board person too. The transit fare box recovery requirements, can you go into more detail about their ask and where we're currently at? And is there a delta to bridge that gap on this one?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, Mayor Harkey. So this is language that's relatively new. So we're still very much in the at the point of digesting it. But in essence, what it would do is sort of set minimum fare box recovery thresholds. And if those thresholds aren't met, it would necessitate additional payments from local agencies. And again, we're still refining exactly what that means. I think there's not exactly a simple interpretation of what their intent is. I think one of the points of frustration, with their proposal, obviously one of the cornerstones of our investment plan is that we are moving to a performance-based funding distribution model. So in terms of commitment to transit efficiencies, in terms of commitment to improving our transit system, the region's already there. And we spent a lot of resources, a lot of time trying to devise a system that could effectively do it, could allow for local decisions still to be made, recognizing the really unique nature of transit funding in this region. As a reminder, it's largely funded through local resources, with the regional amount still contributing a lot. And so some of the new stipulations in the bill related to fare box recovery, I think there's fairly open questions about the practicality of the implementation and how that might actually work. So I'm not sure that exactly answers your question, but as we dive deeper into the bill, we'll certainly provide some follow-up information about those nuances.
Okay, thank you.
Joe?
Just a quick question. Is this allocation here equal to or better than the one that was kicked out by the former governor? Quality?
Mr. Chairman, Mayor Pizzillo, members of the MAG Regional Council. So the allocations that were vetoed by the former governor last year matched the plan allocations. So these deviate from the plan allocations. So from a regional perspective, we would not be able to implement the approved plan with these allocations.
And I think on your air quality question, because the transit number is so low, it would not allow the expansion of bus service. I think that would be a conformity issue, as you expressed earlier.
That's what I was getting to.
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear it from you.
The conversations we had with the governor yesterday, I thought were productive, and it was a broad range of different groups that came to speak. The governor gets it. She understands what we're trying to do and understands the process of 4 years. We talked about everything from SR 30 to SR 24. We talked about, the Northwest Valley and bus rapid transit and how it's lacking there, and the Southeast Valley. And there's different dynamics that happen throughout the valley. And one of the things we touched on was the flexibility of this plan, which was the criticism of Prop 400, was it wasn't flexible enough. When we needed to move money around, those were in silos and you couldn't move them. And I think she's on board. I think you're right. I think it's going to take from Dana, our lobbyist, and our team to work with her team and kind of get that message out. We've got 60 days. It's basically what we have is 60 days. And I think as we hold true to the plan and hold true to the commitments that we made to each other and to the region, I think there'll be more attacks, there'll be more misinformation. But the plan is the plan and the facts are the facts, and that's what we go with. And I think getting that out to our residents and the people who are involved in this is key. So any other comments on this? John, again, I know you and Audra were the targets along with Tim. So glad to see you came up to work today. Any items for future agenda? I will tell you that I will not be here in May. Vice Chair Gallego will be running the meeting. Item 12.
Should be 20 pounds lighter.
I'll be 20 pounds lighter and I'll be in Denver. Comments from the committee? Seeing none, folks.
Mr. Chair, this is President Harvier. I didn't know how to raise my hand on my screen here. I apologize.
The way you did it, sir, is perfect.
And I hate going back on the business action item, but something's sitting with me right now. I feel like I need to ask the question. Please. On the approval, what I believe was approving the cost of living for, I believe it was all of the MAG staff at 1.5%. Is that correct?
Yeah, Ed.
Yeah, that is correct, President Javier.
And, I'm just sitting here and I started kind of looking, and I think the cost of living in Maricopa County is like 8.5%. And we've been praising our staff, how well of a job that they're doing. And I don't know the ins and out of it, but we agreed to it. And I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, and understood. And, I think part of what was brought up, and Ed, jump in when you need to, part of this discussion with Prop 400 is if Prop 400 doesn't go through, what happens as with MAG as an organization? MAG will continue to exist, obviously. But I think what you're seeing, Ed, and Eric and the team, Amy, kind of taking a very cautious approach to costs and salaries going forward. Am I correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that's exactly it.
So I think while in normal situations where Prop 400 wasn't where it is, you'd see those normal cost of living raises that as we do in all cities, we're giving to our employees. I think right now MAG is being cautious on what does our funding look like from member organizations after Prop 400, and we don't want to overextend what we're doing. So I invite you to talk with Ed on that after, or if Ed can reach out. If anybody has any questions more in depth on there, get with Ed, get with Amy.
Okay, thank
Thanks.
you.
No, and I appreciate that bringing it up. I think we're not the only one in the room that was had questions.
Thank you.
We are adjourned, folks.